Begin not with the universe, but with a missing line of code. A developer sits at a desk with 2 monitors glowing like moons. The test suite passes. The app compiles. Users are happy. Somewhere under the surface, a single dependency throws a warning that nobody reads. The program runs anyway. Weeks later, a crash arrives with no clean stack trace. The developer scrolls through logs and feels it in the body before the mind catches up. We have been running on an illusion of completeness. 5% of the system was visible. The other 95% was the dark water under the boat. We built our picture of reality the way that developer built their project, with the parts we could see, the parts we could test, the parts we were able to name. We got very good at that. We wrote laws. We wrote equations. We made machines that drink starlight and spit out truth. We did the noble work of turning curiosity into prediction. The problem is not that our laws are wrong. The problem is that they are partial, and we have been pretending partial is whole because the light stayed on and the coffee stayed warm. Look around and call it success. Photons obey. Electrons obey. Gravity, in the form we meet on stairs and cliffs, obeys. We measure, we model, we launch, we land. And then the sky, with patience that does not insult us, points to a gap we cannot ignore. Galaxies spin too fast for the mass we can count. Clusters hold together like braided hair when there is not enough hair to braid. The cosmic web traces filaments with a hand we cannot see. This is not a tiny error bar. This is the main sentence written in ink we do not own. The universe reports that most of itself operates by rules we barely suspect. That is not a convenient footnote. That is a correction to our posture. We gave the unknown a name that was honest and unsatisfying: dark matter. Dark because it does not shine. Dark because it does not play with electromagnetism. Dark because it refuses the detectors we built for light and charge. Dark because we do not yet know what else to call a thing that holds galaxies together and declines to introduce itself. Dark matter is not a puzzle piece missing from an otherwise complete jigsaw. It is more like discovering that the picture on the box was cropped and the puzzle covers 3 tables instead of 1. The idea that tempts everyone, the one that threads physics journals, late-night podcasts, and kitchen tables, is older than its headlines and newer than its math. Mirror universe. Say the words and your mind tries to give you a villain with a goatee and a hero who learns to distrust reflections. That kind of mirror is fun at parties and useless for work. The mirror that matters here is a symmetry, not a soap opera. It is a proposal that for every particle that plays on our stage, there is a partner that plays in a parallel theater. Not a spooky clone that shakes our hand and disappears into smoke. A silent sibling that never learned to talk to light, that interacts with its own forces and with ours only through the single channel that every mass respects: gravity. There are versions of this story that make your scalp buzz in good and dangerous ways. One says, there is a twin realm where time points the other way, where the arrow you trust when you watch a cup shatter and never unshatter is reversed, and the Big Bang becomes a point of symmetry, a Janus face in a corridor where 2 histories flow out from an uncommon origin. Another says, the twin realm is built from antimatter that never touched ours because some primordial separation locked us into polite non-interaction. Another says, it is more modest than romance. It is a dark sector with its own particles and its own forces, dark photons carrying dark electromagnetism, dark baryons building dark chemistry, and all of it visible to us only as a hand that tugs at mass from behind the curtain. The elegance and the danger share a bed. Elegance. This could explain so much at once: galaxy rotation curves, the ways small galaxies arrange themselves, anomalies in the cosmic microwave background that have been nagging for a decade, tensions in our measures of cosmic expansion that make statisticians pinch the bridge of their nose. Danger. Mirror universe has become a label that stretches to cover different animals. A zoo of hypotheses that resemble each other the way cousins do, enough for a family photo, not enough to share a passport. Strong ideas do this when they are young. They gather more enthusiasm than discipline. We need the discipline. Otherwise, narrative becomes a smokescreen we mistake for a laboratory. Start with what we can point to and not be embarrassed. On the scale of galaxies, gravity misbehaves if you pretend only visible matter exists. You can modify gravity's law. Some do. Or you can accept an unlit mass, abundant and shy. The latter camp marks the map with examples that are both thrilling and disputed. A decade ago, astronomers reported a ghostly galaxy nicknamed Dragonfly 44. The claim, since challenged, revised, argued in the way that good science argues, was that this fragile thing carried almost no stars and almost no gas, yet acted massive, as if 99% of its content were dark. Imagine a skyscraper you can barely see, with only a few lit windows on 1,000 floors, and yet the building persists in a wind that should topple a shack. Whether Dragonfly 44 is as extreme as first reported or simply unusual, the class of such objects is real enough to keep night shifts awake, and the tally of systems whose gravity mocks their glow is long. Pan out to the local group stance. Around Andromeda, our nearest large neighbor, a study of more than 1,000 dwarf satellites revealed something that makes simulators swear softly. Many of those small galaxies seem to share a plane and a sense of direction, like leaves circling in the same current rather than bobbing in chaotic eddies. Our standard pictures of structure formation can produce patterns, they are not crude. But this kind of coherence shows up more often in data than in models, and every time it does, a theorist somewhere opens a new notebook. The temptation is to whisper that the dwarfs feel the pull of something arranged beyond our eyes, a scaffolding woven from dark mass, or if you allow yourself to be bolder, a coupling to structures in a shadow sector that runs alongside ours. Physics has always trafficked in unobservables that became observable once we learned to listen better. Magnetic fields were once trickery. Atoms were once metaphors. Neutrinos were once a polite apology for missing energy. The correct attitude is neither credulity nor contempt. It is this: what would count as a sign? If our heads are turned by mirror universes and dark siblings, where might we catch their footprints? Some hunts are happening already. With gravitational lenses, astronomers watch light from distant galaxies bend around nearer mass. The pattern of bending reveals the shape of the invisible. If the invisible were perfectly smooth, the lensing would be simple.
It is not. The sky is full of Gauze and grit.
In the subtle distortions of lensing maps, the way arcs twist, the way magnifications misbehave, researchers hope to read the fingerprints of dark substructure in the halos around galaxies. One day, those fingerprints might betray not only how much dark matter there is, but how it clumps, how it flows, and whether its interactions with itself differ from zero. A mirror sector with its own forces would have a different social life than a cold, collisionless dark matter sea. Social life leaves marks. Other teams sift through the afterglow of the early universe, the cosmic microwave background. There are small deviations, patterns in the temperature and polarization, that fight with our best fit models. Hubble tension, sound horizon tension, words that sound like the names of bands and keep cosmologists awake for reasons that are not always fun. Some mirror models soften those tensions by allowing additional radiation-like components in the early universe, a dark radiation that shifts the timing of events we infer from the sky's oldest light. The math is subtle, the stakes are not. If the sky tells us in whispers that there were more actors in the first act than we wrote into the script, we should rewrite the script. Closer to home, in labs where coffee is a first language, physicists corral neutrons in traps and count the seconds of their slow decay. Two methods for timing that decay do not agree within error, they disagree in a way that insults patience. One speculative fix: some neutrons hop to a mirror state and back, taking a path our instruments cannot follow, shaving or adding seconds in a way that looks like a clerical error. Oak Ridge hosted an experiment that aimed neutrons at a wall not because anyone wanted to watch neutrons punch drywall, but because a clever idea suggested that under precise magnetic conditions, a few might vanish into a mirror realm and reappear after a beat. The results so far are shy.
The attempt is the point.
The courage to ask a clean question is a kind of science's oxygen. Gravitational waves, the newest sense we have grown, offer another theater. When two black holes merge, they sing. The wave sings at a pitch and a decay that general relativity predicts with smug accuracy. If a mirror sector tugs or leaks or couples in any way that is not symmetrical, the song might carry a harmony we did not expect. A late-time echo. A slight mismatch in the ringdown. We have not heard such an anomaly with conviction yet. We have heard only the promise that deeper listening will justify the microphones we built out of kilometers of vacuum and stubbornness. You can feel now where the argument toggles between wonder and rigor. Mirror universe ideas can be crisp. They can also be gelatinous. Crisp is when you propose a new interaction with a parameter you can bound with a number. Gelatinous is when you say the thing exists beyond all reach, and every failed search is proof that the search must move one level higher. You do not have to hate gelatinous to refuse to live on it. The line between daring and unfalsifiable is thin but guardable, and it is patrolled best by a discipline with enough humility to admit that data is allowed to say no. Meanwhile, the human parts of this story do what human parts do. Headlines sprint ahead of papers because headlines eat attention and papers eat time. A university press office loves a metaphor that glows. A researcher who writes carefully is asked to spice. A grant needs a hook. A journal needs a press release. None of this is wicked. All of it skews. The most dangerous skew is not the oversold promise that a mirror is here and looking back. The most dangerous skew is the slow drift into a world where the math is theater and the experiments are props. Resist that drift with love, not with scorn. We do not need fewer stories. We need stories that apologize to the facts after they finish charming us. There is a deeper way the mirror question sneaks past the guards we keep at the mind's gate. It taps on a window we don't remember installing. It asks, what part of your life is moved by forces you do not see? Not magical forces. Not astrological forces. Mundane, relentless forces. A word you decided not to say 6 years ago. A glance a stranger gave you that still lives in your posture. A phone call made and a phone call not made. We are proud of the reasons we can name. We are formed by the ones we cannot. This is not a cheap pivot from physics to therapy. It is a recognition that the structure of an argument repeats at different scales. Astronomers infer dark matter because visible matter alone cannot account for the motions they see. You infer that an old memory has mass because your choices orbit it in ways nothing else explains. The invisible pulls. You feel the gravity before you draft the map. Pretending that only the visible matters is not stoicism, it is a kind of superstition dressed up as pragmatism. Ask yourself about a move you almost made and didn't, a city you almost lived in, a life you almost built. The ledger you showed your friends had numbers for salary, cost of living, schools, weather. Under the ledger sat forces that punched above their weight.
A smell you couldn't stand.
A skyline that made you feel seen. A childhood worry with a new hat. That was your personal dark matter. When you honored it, your life made a new kind of sense. When you ignored it, your steps felt miscounted. What physics asks of itself, we might ask of our days. Do we have the courage to admit when the map we can print is not the whole terrain?
Return to the sheets and the numbers.
A quiet creature with the uninspired catalog name DF44 taught us to be careful with both euphoria and despair. Its first portrait made it look like a giant wrapped in fog, almost pure dark matter with a few stars stuck to its bones. Later measurements deflated the legend a little. The truth most likely sits between extremes. That is what truths do. The important part is not whether this one galaxy is 99% dark or 60 or 40. The important part is that wherever we look, we find structure held by hands we cannot shake. Those hands build a web. Simulations of structure formation in a dark matter-dominated universe trace filaments and nodes that look uncomfortably like something alive. It is not alive. But the geometry tickles a part of the brain that recognizes design and must be reminded that nature can draw elegance without a designer's signature. Even so, the patterns demand a language. We have a little of it already: power spectrum, halo mass function, bias, substructure. A mirror sector with its own self-interactions would change those patterns. Not randomly. Systematically. Our job is to be sensitive enough to recognize the difference between cold and indifferent and warm and chatty in a medium that does not speak in words. This is where the dark photon earns its cameo. If there is a photon-like messenger in the dark sector, and if that messenger mixes a little with our photon the way two radio stations sometimes bleed into each other on a bad drive through the hills, then in rare and carefully arranged conditions, ordinary matter might feel a nudge from dark charges.
It won't be a light on your wall stuttering to the beat.
It will be an anomaly in a detector's quiet. It will be a signal that stares back longer than noise does. These experiments are patient by necessity. The budgets are not always kind. The people who tend them are stubborn in a way we should pay for and thank more than we do. Other portals wear different names.
Higgs portals.
Axion portals. Sterile neutrinos moving like diplomats between sectors. If your eyes glaze over at the taxonomy, let them clear for the principle. We are building doorways out of math and standing beside them to see if anything walks through. Most days, nothing does. Some days, a fluctuation raises its hand and we spend 6 months learning whether it is mischief or meaning. When mischief wins, a good lab throws a small party and fixes a cable. When meaning wins, nobody sleeps for a week. There is also a proposal that feels dangerous because it is simple and because it makes poets and physicists stumble into each other in the hallway. Some have suggested that information lost in black holes here might be stored there, in a mirror sector, as if the two sides keep a shared ledger. This is tidy in a way that reality rarely is. It is also beautiful in a way that makes me suspicious. File it under worthy speculation and ask for a measurable consequence before you kneel. The twinning of time remains among the most intoxicating and treacherous ideas. If the Big Bang is a low-entropy boundary and the arrow of time we trust is a local emergent habit, then a mirrored arrow proceeding from the same boundary in the opposite direction is not nonsense. It is a radical reframing of what we mean by before and after. It does odd things to causality if you stare too hard. It makes philosophers lift their heads. It makes engineers roll their eyes and ask what to build tomorrow. The correct reaction is probably both. An arrow you cannot test is not worthless, it is not yet science. It might become science if it points us toward new predictions that do not collapse under measurement. You do not have to climb cosmic heights to bump your head against the limits of your senses. Your eyes see a narrow stripe of the electromagnetic spectrum. Your ears hear a narrow stripe of vibrations. Your instruments, magnificent as they are amplifications of those stripes plus a few sense organs we taught ourselves to borrow: gravitation, neutrinos, muons, microwaves that are older than language. Everything else is inference. We are not ashamed of that. We are careful with it. The mirror question pushes on the edge where care becomes caution, becomes fear. It invites a cognitive revolution as much as a technological one. The upgrade is not only in the telescope but in the habit. You cannot detect a pattern you are unwilling to consider. What would consider look like as a discipline? It would look like this. It would ask for predictions that pick one hypothesis and leave the others outside in the weather. It would design experiments that make room for being wrong in an interesting way. It would reject the theory that explains everything at the cost of explaining nothing. It would nurture people who can say "I don't know yet" on camera and not be punished for grace. It would tolerate ambition without letting romance bully rigor. It would reward those who prune, not only those who plant. It would also ask something hard of the rest of us: to stop treating every unseen thing as a ghost or a god and start treating it as a neighbor we have not met. Neighbors have habits.
Habits li evidens.
Evidence can be gathered.
Gathering Tagestime.
There is a soft, necessary pivot back to us.
Notbekause wie Ase mehr sure of allthings. Bekause wie Ase seat of the questions.
A mirror universe, if it exists, is not your evil twin shaving in reverse. It is a second space of law and relation that shares a gravitational handshake with ours. And yet it works on you.
Not because of force. Because of story.
Knowing that the majority of reality is invisible and active reduces the arrogance of the visible. It trains a muscle we need for everything that matters: humility in the presence of scale. If you accept that most of the cosmos is on channels we do not receive, it becomes easier to accept that most of your mind is not on channels you can name. You are not only the sentences you can say. You are impulses that came from older rooms. You are instruments you did not build and cannot repair with words alone. That is not mystical. That is anatomy. Learn to live with what you cannot see and you will do less harm with what you can. Back on the technical floor, the hunts continue with habits as old as Galileo and as new as a purpose-built neural net. Teams train machines to find patterns in star fields that the unaugmented eye misses. A convolutional network can tease out subtle lensing effects from noisy images better than a human who has not slept. A transformer can spot the signature of a subhalo in how a background galaxy's light warps. The machines do not prove a mirror exists. They give us better maps of the dark. The maps can be compared to model universes with and without a shadow sector. If the comparison keeps favoring one, that is how you pry a door open without breaking your wrist. We will make mistakes. We will claim too soon. We will mock too soon. We will publish papers that age less gracefully than their authors. We will also, if we are lucky, build a chain of small, clean results that point in the same direction for longer than a news cycle. Those chains are the opposite of viral. They are quiet.
They do not trend. They pay.
Return for a minute to the most unsettling question in the transcript that started this conversation. What changes if the mirror exists? The timidest answer is everything and nothing. Nothing, because your morning will still need coffee and your taxes will still require receipts. Everything, because the web you live in gains a second layer that explains why some strings vibrate the way they do. It changes how we think about identity if part of what you are is information that translates across sectors. That is science fiction gossip until there is an equation. It is also a mirror held up to our habits. You have always been many versions of yourself folded into one life. Knowing that the universe favors redundancy and shadow does not make you an alien. It makes you better company to yourself. It changes how we think about causality if some of the wiggle in the numbers arrives from couplings we cannot directly interrogate. That is dangerous to say out loud because it invites charlatans who sell the comfort of anything goes.
Do not buy it.
Physics is not abandoning causality, it is trying to upgrade it where the world has politely asked for an upgrade. It changes how we think about freedom if our choices are built on an underlayer of constraints we have not named yet. That was true before we learned the word axion. It will be true after. The total human thing is to keep acting, keep choosing, while your model updates in the background with the serenity of a device you cannot shut off. You may be wondering if all this ever touches the ground.
It does.
Policy follows worldview even when it pretends to be above it. A culture that believes the world is thin acts like a vandal. A culture that knows the world is thick acts like a steward. Thick here is not a compliment to complexity for its own sake. It is a vow to care about the layers you do not profit from. It is why we fund basic research. It is why we teach children to love questions that will not buy them lunch. It is why we tolerate the eccentric who points at a graph and whispers, "Look. If you want something smaller to carry, take a scene." A reactor room at a national lab hums at a frequency you can feel under your teeth. A team in blue shoe covers runs a sequence they have run so many times it lives in their wrists. Neutrons are born, corralled, counted. Someone watches a screen where decay curves walk down a hill at the pace of a patient animal. Adjust the magnetic field.
Wait. Count again.
The difference between a glitch and a portal is 9 months of repetition and a willingness to be bored. A woman leaves the lab and gets into a car that smells like rain and coffee. She thinks of Andromeda's dwarfs sharing a plane and the neutrino's stubborn refusal to weigh what it should. She thinks of a galaxy we called a dragonfly and then scolded for being less magical than we hoped. She thinks of a child who asked if there are stars we cannot feel because they belong to someone else's sky. She says out loud in a voice that would be ashamed to be caught being poetic, "We don't know yet." It is the best kind of prayer. Elsewhere, a person who has not read a physics paper since school stands at a sink and tastes the water and cannot say why it tastes a little not them this morning. They have a decision to make. They think of moving cities. They think of staying. They are haunted by the unmeasured mass under each option. They do not know that a team of astronomers used data from a survey whose name they will never remember to argue about filaments and halos. They do not need to know. They are still, in the deepest sense, doing the same work, inferring the shape of a force from the motion it imposes.
Once you start to life's way, the mirror stops being a spectacle.
It becomes a habit. You ask, what am I not seeing that holds this together? You ask, what would count as a sign? You ask, how can I be kinder to the parts of reality that refuse to pose for photographs? Those questions scale from galaxies to kitchens without breaking their backs. There is a temptation always there, always strong to demand that every good idea pay rent immediately in the currency of devices and timelines.
Some should. Some must. Not this one, not yet.
The mirror hypothesis is not a gadget. It is a lens we are machining. When it gets polished enough, we will see if the world lines up sharpened or still blurred. If sharpened, build the devices. If blurred, be proud that we learned how to grind. It feels right to end where beginnings happen, in the small.
Not in a collider. In a classroom.
A teacher stands in front of a whiteboard and draws a circle. Around it they draw smaller circles. They say, this big one is a galaxy and the small ones are its satellites. They give the dwarfs names that sound like math, and kids laugh and then stop laughing when they learn that the universe names things to keep track. The teacher tells a story about how some of those small circles move in one plane like a quiet parade. The teacher says, our models say that is not common. The teacher does not say, and maybe a mirror pulls. The teacher says, the world is often more organized than our equations predict, and sometimes less. The teacher writes 2 words on the board in neat print.
Unknowns multiply.
The class copies the words and does not yet know that they just met their future. Walk outside after class if you can. There is a sky above you that looks empty.
It is not.
There is a ground under you that looks steady.
It is steady enough.
You are woven between dark matter, mirror sectors, arrows of time reversed, dark photons whispering across a membrane. None of us can touch these are ways we are trying to admit that we are small correctly. Small and loud, small and curious, small and the best part capable of becoming less wrong without becoming less ourselves. The mirror, if it exists, is not our judge. It is not our destiny. It is a partner in a dance that we have only just learned to hear the music for. The steps are patience, precision, imagination, restraint. The rules are simple: do not lie, do not flinch, do not worship your own metaphors, and remember that not everything you cannot see is your enemy. Tonight, a telescope somewhere will open its eye and collect photons that have been traveling longer than our species has had words. A server farm will hum and cool and process a curve that looks like boredom until a trained mind reads the wobble that is meaning. In a lab, a detector will sit in a dark room beneath a mountain and wait for a whisper of a particle that might never arrive. At a kitchen table, someone will rest their palm on a map and decide to go, not because the numbers add up but because something heavy and invisible inside them pulled. We pretend our stories end because endings are neat.
This one doesn't.
It continues as data accrues and as longing learns how to bow without kneeling. It continues as journals publish and as friends argue and as instruments fail and get repaired in the middle of the night by hands that shake just enough to prove there is a person under the gloves. It continues as you fall asleep to the sound of a fridge motor and wake to the sound of your own heart. If there is one sentence you can carry into the day when this conversation turns from curiosity to news, let it be unadorned and light enough to hold. Most of reality does not glow, and yet it shapes. Most of what shapes you does not announce itself, and yet it is yours to learn. The mirror is not a wall. It is a reminder to turn your head and notice the outline of what holds you, even when you cannot touch it, even when you cannot name it yet, even when the only evidence you have is motion that refuses to be an accident. And if you wake tomorrow and the water tastes like itself again, if the lab returns only negatives, if the telescope's night was cloudy, that is not failure. That is the world asking you to keep the cadence.
To look again. To ask better.
To become the kind of civilization that treats the unknown not as a threat to its pride but as a teacher with an accent. The real work is not to catch a mirror with your hands. The real work is to see yourself in your method and do it with a little more care than you did yesterday. The developer at the desk finds the missing line at last. The warning was not the crash, it was the kindness that came before it. The code runs cleaner. The app breathes. The logs are less mysterious and more themselves.
That is the joy. Not the boast. The joy.
To remove one thin sliver of ignorance and feel the system get quieter around you. Now imagine that for galaxies. Imagine it for the sky. Imagine it for the life you are building.
That is the point. Not to rule. To understand. Not to finish. To continue.
Do this long enough and the mirror stops scaring you. It becomes what it was always going to be, a second way the world reminds you that you are included in something you cannot finish counting. A second way of being held. A second way of being asked to grow.